I'd like to introduce our first speakers, Swapna and Natasha from BMO, and they're going to also shout out fellow Canadians. They're going to be talking about allocation. So I'll turn it over to Swapna and Natasha, and please give them a warm welcome.
Okay, thank you guys for taking the time this morning. I'm Swapna Samuel. I have the privilege of heading the FinOps practice for BMO. And joining me on stage is...
Hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Xu. I'm the Senior Finance Manager of the Central Cloud FinOps at BMO. I'm really excited to be here this morning with everyone and looking forward to the next 45 minutes to share some insights and exchange ideas on chargeback and allocations.
Awesome. Now, aside from our title of saying cost allocation models and chargeback, I hope you've noticed that little line that says the ultimate fusion, tech and finance. Now, the reason for that is, now between Natasha and myself, we couldn't be more polar opposites even if we tried. From our personalities, our likes and dislikes, or even our experience, while both of us have over 2 decades of enterprise rollouts, process re-engineering, governance and controls experience, mine has predominantly been as a tech solution architect from the tech side, while she has been all things finance. And that's really how we've set up our FinOps practice. We have a whole bunch of tech SMEs and a whole bunch of finance SMEs. Now, I don't know if you've heard the one-liner where it says, marriages are made in heaven, but so is thunder and lightning. And so that's really how some of our FinOps practice discussions are. They are kind of chaotic. They do come from different perspectives, but everyone has the same objectives. But sometimes how we look at value and how we get there is fairly different from the fin and tech space. So having set up a practice to look at these things collaboratively has really resulted in accelerated growth of our practice. And one such fruit of that growth is the cost allocation models and chargeback. And so just out of curiosity here, how many tech people do we have in the house? Nice. How many finance? Oh, wow. OK, this is going to be 50-50. This is great. I'm excited. So just to level set, what we're going to do is quickly run through the taxonomy, just to ensure we're saying the same things. We've gotten into discussions where we'd be talking 45 minutes, arguing a point to realize at the end, pretty much the same. So trying to avoid that. And then what we want to do is be very real and talk to you from a BMO perspective, what have been our challenges and our learnings, and then get into the meat of it all, where we get to talk about how did we come about designing our allocation models, and how does operationalizing it in BMO look like?
So with that, as Swapna has mentioned, before we get into the fun part, let's spend a couple of minutes to make sure that we are all saying the same thing. I'm sure as many of you in this room, you have spent days arguing over a topic only to find out after the fact that you all have the common objective and outcome. And for my fellow finance counterpart, I don't know how many conversations you have with your business partner saying that, hey, I'm already receiving the cost, but essentially you're only getting a showback versus an actual chargeback. So very quickly, allocation, what we're talking about is really identifying the expenses and aligning to the right person, LOB, line of business, or product that's using it. And what that really does help us is to introduce the chargeback or the showback mechanism. And they're mutually exclusive in a sense that the way, as a finance person, I always kind of explain chargeback is see it more as a bill. At the end of the day, it's something that hits your bottom line, and you have to pay that invoice at the end of the day. But for showback, it's something a little softer. It's almost like management reporting at an FYI, and it's really a good tool to use if you're trying to introduce a new chargeback methodology where you're easing your end user into what are the potential charges they can expect to receive. But all of 3 processes are done with the goal to provide cost transparency and align financial accountability. And in the FinOps space, what we want to do with this is really to kind of foster cost optimization by having informed decision-making to minimize waste.
OK, cloud cost allocation challenges, the fun part. OK, all the tech people in the house said, yes, data quality and availability. Obviously, we know that a cost allocation strategy is as effective as its tagging structure. Now, the problem or the landmines we got to carefully navigate and tiptoe around is the often mix of what is actually a tag versus what is really metadata. So when I say metadata, it's basically data about data. So say, for example, if my tag is an application ID or my primary tag is the cost center, that's all I really need to associate it to my resources. So if you were to ask and say, well, I also need to know who owns the application or who's the parent cost center that it rolls up to, what's the hierarchy, all of that is really metadata. I don't need to force my tech engineering resources to now tag every resource to those four. I have it tagged to a primary tag, and then I have mappings outside it that now say, this tag, here's all the categories, classifications, here's what this kind of application is, and so forth, and have that metadata there. So ensuring simplicity at its finest was very key, as well as not dismissing what the business is saying, right? So if finance says, I need this, we get it, but let the tech people know how to solve for it and showcase those results instead of like complicating a tagging strategy. So that was one thing we had to really make sure we did not get ourselves into a sticky spot.
Yeah, and once you reach the sweet spot in terms of what is the right level of data you need to support your cost allocation approach, the next challenge you have to overcome is how do we actually operationalize your cost allocation model? What is the cost of administrating the model that you have designed? And asking questions like, do I have the right volume to pass through an automation? Is the cost benefit worth the cost of automation? Or even, is your data in a reliable stage, meaning that has the model is mature enough to invest in automation and preventing any necessary rework of the model? Or is it a good idea to, in the interim, have a manual process in place until your data has stabilizes? So for BMO, what we have done is we actually invested the time to make sure both our allocation process and the data itself has reached a maturity stage before we took an iterative approach to invest in automation to do cost allocation against the investment via our PPM tool. And the other key challenge we have to overcome here is really around timing. Just with every big organization at BMO, we actually go through annual planning cycle where our funding is being allocated on an annual basis, sometime halfway before the year even started. However, as we kind of go through allocation models for different services and product, stars doesn't always align in terms of when timing of the information might be available. And what this causes essentially is whoever is receiving the charge may not even have the budget to support the charges that are coming through them. And luckily for us, we do have funding realignment processes, plan transfers that can facilitate that. But on the flip side of the coin is this is resulting in unnecessary rework, as well as nobody likes surprises in their funding, and having those difficult discussions with the line of business does not improve the relationship that we're trying to build with FinOps.
And now the fun part, complexity of allocating shared costs. Now, aside from the fact that there are some resources that can be tagged easily and those that just can't, when it comes to some of the shared costs, we get those that we know that we can track, and I know who's using what. And then we do have shared resources where, as much as I'd like to, we just can't divvy it up. We'll have to go through saying, am I going to even split it? Am I going to do an equitable chargeback for that? Am I going to have a predetermined variable proportion? Now, from a tech perspective, I can make a pretty fairly complex design to get to a level of granularity. But the problem here is, what's the benefit? When we look at the PMs, and they need to be able to forecast their usage, if I get into that level of granularity for a PM, on what basis are they going to see it? What is the level that they need to see their shared costs associated to their applications in order to now be in a place that I can make an informed decision to predict how my upcoming forecasts are going to be looking like? And then you add in the finance guys who are trying to balance the budget and saying, how much are you burning through what you have? You now, again, need to try and think and say, what is the value in terms of me handling my shared costs this way? And so, lessons learned.
Yeah, as we kind of mature along our cost allocation model journey, there are several lessons learned that we picked up along the way. And what you see on screen here are three key ones that we want to highlight to you. Coming from Central Cloud FinOps, we know our goal of cost allocation. It's It's basically making sure that cost is aligned to whoever is incurring it, driving cost transparency, and having that financial accountability. But through conversations with our key stakeholders across the enterprise with different persona, everybody have different motivation in terms of why they want to allocate their respective product or services costs out. Having those upfront conversations, involving them in the cost allocation model design upfront, will make sure that we have all the business values closely aligned and eliminate any potential rework. And on top of that, from a finance perspective, give yourself sufficient lead time to broker the funding realignment facilitation discussion to ensure that the transition of the cost allocation model is as seamless as possible. And the next lessons learned is really the art of knowing what is good enough and try not to boil the ocean. So many a times coming from finance, I want to kind of reconcile to the best of my ability. And when it comes to cost allocation, you want to have an equitable method to make sure that people understand the invoice that they are receiving. But as we know, with all the changes that we see coming from the cloud service providers and different pricing model as they evolve, and as we have heard through the keynote, business changes, things change all the time. And we need to find a sweet spot in terms of doing the cost-benefit analysis of knowing when is good enough and move forward and iterate accordingly. And the last lesson learned that we have, and luckily for us, we have Swapna, we are able to very effectively navigate around it because this is one of her specialty.
Okay, gathering the herd. You heard early on in terms of me drawing that parallel to our FinOps practice being like a good marriage, right? Give and take, compromise. And I'd like to consider this portion as marriage counseling. So you have everything set within in-house, you know how to make things work, because again, within our practice, we have both tech and finance. But now when we go to business units, different groups, they have different levels of maturity. For an organization like BMO, as much as we'd like to say the entire organization is at a specific maturity level, that just isn't the case. And so what happens is when we try to talk why this cost allocation model or why are we doing this, oftentimes with the business units that are low maturity, really consider it like good counseling. You have a friend couple and then you split up and say, you go talk to her, I'm going to go talk to him. That's really what we tend to do. So we have the FinOps tech practitioners on our team who'll set up meetings with the tech folks and the engineers and say, hey, here's why finance is asking these questions. Here's what they really mean. Here's what value looks in for us. Here's where we're looking at it. And what do you think? And then we have the FinOps finance SMEs talking to the FinOps people of the house from that particular business unit and explaining the same. Once we get everyone in terms of alignment and they're able to understand the hesitancy as well as the value that each party is bringing to the table, we then bring them all together into one meeting because now we understand the value and we are bringing the value together. Obviously, for the business units that have a much higher level of maturity, it's simple. We bring everyone together at the same table. The engineers are there, the finance guys are there. We're able to talk collaboratively and get things done. But the main thing I want to emphasize is it is definitely worth taking the effort to value translate this, because taking the effort into value translation is foundational for value realization. I cannot emphasize this enough. You might seem like, oh, that sounds like a very tedious process, Swapna. In fact, taking that time initially on has allowed us to accelerate considerably. Yes, it does seem a little tedious initially. Yes, it does take time. But the benefits that we've reaped from it has been insurmountable. So definitely want to say, take a look at that. Now, coming to the good stuff, designing allocation models. We've heard the common saying, one size doesn't fit all. Guess what? Neither does one style. Because every business unit, they have the business rationale for asking what they want. It may be very different from a different business unit, but the way I like to picture it is almost like the multiverse. If there are any Marvel fans here, or Into the Spider-Verse, yes, thank you. You get to see the same people having different roles, different challenges, but having the same personality and character. And so there is a touch of having that multiverse kind of lens when designing your allocation models, while maintaining the data integrity so that at the end of the day, when I pull my unit economic measures against it, it is impeccable. I can look at my data from the source system of the console to the reporting systems to my total cost of ownership, and it will be consistent, all right? And so there is a little bit of ensuring that we hear a lot at the beginning and design to it.
And at BMO, we support multiple various different banking application, internal application, as well as corporate functions. And as Swapna has alluded, there's no one-size-fits-all allocation model that we can apply across all the different product and services that we are supporting today. So what we have done is, as a central Cloud FinOps team, we have taken a more pragmatic approach. And what do we mean by this is, instead of defining this is the allocation model, we define what is the guiding principle when you're thinking about creating your allocation model. And this serves as the clear guiding principle and guardrails as we go into analyzing every single product application. What are the key objectives this allocation needs to achieve? It needs to be able to drive cost accountability, and it needs to make sure that there's clear alignment of expenses, and last but not least, the effectiveness of the model evaluation. As I've mentioned previously, spending months and months trying to come up with a model versus getting a product quick to market and have it assess and iterate is one of the core values that we would like to bring as part of the Central Cloud FinOps team. And using 3 very clear guiding principles as we step through and evaluate every single product and asset that comes through the allocation pipeline, we have requested that we know who is that single point of contact, like who is the owner, or lack of a better word, what is that single neck to choke if anyone has any question about why are they receiving this bill? What does this bill look like from 2 months down the road? This is a single product owner that we work with closely to get to the end of job with any allocation model. Next, we pull in our engineering partners. We do need to have very clear architectural guidance in terms of what is the target state for this service or product that we're trying to allocate out? Is this something that's mandatory? Is this a security log that is required across the board and the recipient have no say or influence over the cost that they're receiving? This will help us move the allocation discussion a little quicker in the sense that if it's something that they have no control over, let's not boil the ocean, keep it as a shared cost and allocate it out based on a proportion method. Last but not least, in order for us to allocate any cost, we need to be able to identify what the cost driver is. And what we want to emphasize here is it shouldn't be something that you track manually at the side of your desk with an Excel spreadsheet in terms of what the cost allocation drivers are. Because one of our primary objectives here is the effectiveness of the allocation model. Having the understanding of the automated generated data to support your cost allocation is one of the key guiding principles that we have laid out in our framework to help us move our cost allocation model along. Oops. Yeah.
Okay, value determination. So, just side note story. So we arrived yesterday, and our flight from Toronto is a little over 5 hours. And so, like I said, we are 2 polar opposites. Before the flight could take off the tarmac, I was knocked out fast asleep. She stayed awake through the entire 5 hours. Guess who was the happy person when we reached? So, an hour and a half into the flight, I wake up, I look out of the window, beautiful cloudy skies, and my seat was basically located like a little after the wing. So when I look out of the window, I see the wing, I see, the blades and all of that. But what grabs my attention is this paper, that's a couple of papers that are stuck there, one right above, where the blades are running, and then a few other places where there's a little dent. There's a paper that's stuck, and then there's like clear tape on top of that, right? And it says, do not step. And then there's another one that says, where the dent was saying, make sure clear blockage. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, for someone who actually works, for people in that domain, I'm pretty sure everyone knows not to step there, right? Like they've been working there for years. They clearly know, don't step there. For someone who has no association to that domain, I would think it's pretty common knowledge to know that if you see something stuck in that dent, take it off. Clearly, experience has taught them otherwise, that there are some things worth re-emphasizing over and over again, because the ramifications of making that miss is so severe that it's not worth taking the risk. And so is the same thing when it comes to value determination in some of the things with our cloud. It may seem like it's rudimentary. It may seem like, Swapna, why are you asking us these questions? I've spun up 300 applications. It's okay. The ramifications of not doing these checks can be so severe that it's worth going over these questions again and again and again, irrespective of what it is. So what we did is we said, here's the framework that we're going to follow at BMO. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what it is. If these are cloud dollars and they're going to be charged, these are the questions that everyone needs to answer, because we don't want to see if the potential of something going wrong. And so what is the outcome we want to achieve? Key questions that now, anytime there's a cloud dollar that needs to be charged back, here's what we run through as a checklist. What behavior are we trying to influence? So a good example would be if from within the bank there's a specific technology that I want to drive adoption, I want every group to now do because of compliance, does it make sense for me to go to every line of business or every business unit saying, oh, if you use it, I'm going to charge you, but no, please use it? It's almost counterintuitive, right? So we need to start checking in terms of value. What is it we're doing and why? Next is, whose behavior are we trying to influence? Is it our end clients? Is it infrastructure team, our app teams, our product units? Who is it? Next, what incentives will this allocation model provide? Obviously, there are multiple models, but what is the incentive? What is the value that I'm trying to get? If there's not much that I'm trying to get, it's more for just ensuring, because I've already signed up these contracts, I already have these license agreements, nothing's going to change. And if it's just for chargeback and I want to see it, doesn't make sense for me to now go through endless hours of administrative work to try and get to granularity, which has no value in its place. Or are there ones where I actually want to see user behavior, and therefore I want to charge it in higher frequency so that I can change behavior and impact my financials? And next is, where will the impact be measured? Is it going to be at the total cost of ownership, like we just saw? Or is it at the app owner's budget, for example? So having these guiding frameworks has honestly helped quell a lot of discussions or very entertaining, high-pitched arguments that may come over sometimes when people say, no, let's charge it, or let's not charge it, or we have this, or you can't charge me for that. It's very simple. Have a framework. Have a framework. It's not based on anyone's opinions. These are best practices. Run it through the framework. See where it sits.
And with the guiding principle and the framework that we have put in place, what you see on screen is a decision tree that we pass the asset through every time when we're deciding whether or not to allocate a shared cost. So at BMO, in order for any of the allocation process to have a material impact in anyone's behavior or P&L that will drive behavior, is we did set a materiality threshold of $1 million or more before we'll look into allocating the cost. And based on the size of your organization, that dollar amount may look slightly different. If the materiality checkpoint has not been passed, the recommendation that we have 99.99% of the time is just to hold the cost centrally and allocate it out as a shared cost. However, if it does meet the dollar threshold, what we then assess is there a way that we can find a reliable cost driver? And as I've alluded to earlier, this is not just something that we're looking for where you're tracking at the back of via Excel or any manual tool. We want the driver to be something traceable from a banking industry, not just for audit purposes, but also to kind of take away the noise in trying to justify why you're receiving the bill that you're receiving. If it's through ServiceNow where the licenses is provisioned based on a user basis, we have that proof and the audit trail of your manager attesting to you needing the licenses that attributed to the cost. So having that traceability allows us to determine whether or not we will take this a step further and further allocate the cost. If the cost driver is not available, Similar to the first method, either we hold it centrally, or we can take it a step further by allocating it at the service and product level. So just as an example, if I have a function that at the S3 bucket level, I'm able to tag to which line of business is using the identified resource, but I do have untaggable glue jobs that is not able to align to the line of business. What we can recommend then is using the volume of spend that goes through the S3 bucket and appropriate the spend accordingly for those untaggable jobs accordingly. But if we're in an ideal state where we know it's material enough and we do have the cost driver, we then kind of go through what kind of contract is this spend being incurred under. If there's a long-term commitment or is it a pay-per-use kind of function, we then use it to decide what is the next allocation model. Do we actually do it in a more fixed manner whereby we allocate the cost quarterly with true-ups to reduce the amount of overhead of monthly administration? Or if we have the system and data in place that facilitate real-time feedback to influence action, as Swapna has alluded to, then we'll go down to the user-based approach where the chargeback happen on a monthly basis. So going through this decision tree will help you put in a more systematic approach as you assess each of the different services that you want to put through your cost allocation model.
And again, like what we showed here are examples of it, right? And so what we did is when we put in the question checklist and the flow tree that you have here, we made sure that we ran it through, execs had exec level feedback, and enabled that top-down push through it, which makes it really easy. So just as a side note into it. Now the good stuff, operationalizing this cloud cost and allocation and how it looks like in BMO. Obviously, confidentiality restrictions, we can't get into all the details, but this is pretty much the crux of it all. So first and foremost, what we do is so say, for example, let's say our primary tag key is the application. That's what all my resources are tagged to. I know which application these resources are. What I do now have is a separate mapping where I know which applications follow which allocation model. Am I doing this by direct charges because I know all the resources can be tagged and it's all set to one application? It's fairly simple. Are these ones where I have two business units using it and they've already predetermined a 60-40 split? Okay. There may be ones where I'm going to be handling shared costs based on their usage, like we said, right, an equitable chargeback model. So I have those mappings already preset and kept. Obviously, the business units have the ability to make changes to that model month over month. There's nothing that's stopping them from making that. The solution is fairly scalable, so we're pretty good there. And so what happens is, now that we have that, the next question is, how am I dealing with the shared costs? Like I said, we have that in. And so all we do then is now take in our invoices in from our cloud service providers. So AWS and Azure are the prominent ones that we have. And what I then do is when we push these dollars in and we know, okay, I know the mapping, I know I'm going to handle it, we go one level a little more granular, which is we take a look at and see which ones of the dollars are actually cloud usage dollars. Now, what I mean by that is your actual usage charges, devoid of any credits. So as we're processing those dollars, we actually have categories that tag it from the back end that say, so not your tagging policies, but again, as we're processing the financials in, we know which ones are usage costs because we can see that from the CSP. And then we know which ones are actually accredited dollars. We know that. We know our support and tax amounts come in from the enterprise wherever we have our billing accounts, and we know how we handle that. We know how we handle our FX rates. So when we process the dollars in, we make sure when we process it in as part of our code, we actually tag it behind the scenes. Now, the advantage of that is when project managers or the finance folks now pull it, they're able to see their costs saying, for this month, here are my shared costs, here are my usage costs, here are all the adjustments, which encompasses, like support, tax, any true-ups that you may have, as well as here are my credits. Now, the reason why that's really fantastic is because PMs now don't have to worry about saying, oh no, what happened? Especially if you have savings plans running through it. We all know, like say, for example, with AWS, they're going to do your algorithm based on what is the most effective savings for that month. Now, imagine a PM now saying, ooh, I got 30 grand credits this time. And next month you say, no, you didn't. Someone else got it. And someone needs to forecast that. That's like a nightmare. And then finance is now beating down the head saying, what did you do? Why did you overspend? And they're like, I didn't. It's the same spend as last time, but you're 30K over. So having those level of granularity helps because it simplifies the process for the different audience users. Having that kind of granularity behind the scenes, not enforcing it on the engineers to do the tagging, having it part of the automated process, yet giving finance the ability to see it in whatever level. And we've taken it a step further actually recently over the past month, wherein what we've done is as part of our charging of the dollars, we also look to see at which level the invoices were paid and put that category, and as well as to ensure that wherever we're doing cost recoveries, that those are tagged as well. So once we know who's signing the contracts, we're able to say, oh, here are the invoices, here are the cost recoveries, here are the usages, and it just happens. Now, did we reach on that just like that? No. It so happened that we were poring over the finance, like, why are you guys doing this report? Oh, because we need to see cost recovery. And the question is, well, why didn't you tell us you wanted that? We would have helped you do it. So having finance and tech work together honestly has worked miracles for us at BMO and has really helped solidify us as a FinOps practice and has made our conversations go really, really, really well. And so just to wrap it up before we go into some questions.
So as we have kind of spent the past 25 minutes, 30 minutes going through some of the hurdles, what we have done, and what have we learned through the process, what we want to kind of really leave you guys in this room with is having that clear understanding of why are we going through the cost allocation process. Knowing the knowing the business driver and motivation behind each of the key personas will not only help with the FinOps agenda of driving cost transparency and accountability, but as an organization, you'll also provide greater data to really help make the right business decision and drive the business value that you're trying to achieve as an enterprise.
And again, cost-benefit analysis, guys, for every model. Not everything is worth it. Just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. And so have those discussions. Find the safe group. Find groups that you can do your POCs with to test out the model before you want to do a rollout. Find those friendlies in. And those kinds of success rollouts make a big difference because now everyone wants to be part of that success story.
And also establishing the right problem statement up front before you go into the deep dive mode of selecting the allocation model will not only help reduce the wastage in terms of the months that you spend developing an allocation framework, but it will also remove you having to have a lot of those unnecessary difficult conversations. So what we mean by this is if there's something that is not worth doing, as Swapna has alluded, make sure that everyone is on the same page in terms of what you're trying to achieve when you're allocating your costs. Is it really to solve a funding problem, or is it to drive cost accountability, making sure that you're impacting the action to reduce costs for your enterprise? Having clear delineation of the business problem will help streamline the cost allocation process as you try to implement them across your businesses.
And engage the required stakeholders, guys. Everyone has a reason for feeling the way they feel, and they have good perspectives because they're in the weeds of it, especially with the different business units and the different roles. And so hearing them out, sometimes it may not be associated to the immediate problem you're trying to solve, but it can trigger in some designs and thoughts that need to be taken into account for future updates. And so engage them. Engage whether it's your finance, whether it's your cloud leads, your cloud architects, your execs. Please, exec top-level support goes a long way. We have the benefit of having some really amazing execs who support the push down through. It's phenomenal. And engage, okay? And definitely highly recommend, if anyone's here who's still starting up the FinOps practice, do think about having a mix of both finance and tech.
And last but not least, knowing that it's okay to not have the perfect solution when you're trying to implement a cloud cost. Having the key right stakeholder in the process and understanding that FinOps is really a team sport. The one thing that I always talk about with FinOps is people underplay the amount of change management and marketing that's required for you to push your agenda forward. So putting this up front, knowing that we're here to learn together, and as we iterate through the cost allocation process, giving people insight into what their cloud spend is really step one. And as you mature through this process, re-evaluating it as new services and product comes up, as business services changes, that will really help provide you with the strong foundation to have more in-depth business discussion with your key stakeholders. So with that, I think we have about 10 minutes for Q&A.
Yeah, we have, thank you very much. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, Swapna. Thank you, Natasha. It's a great breakout session to kick off the conference. Thank you for underscoring the importance of allocation, but more importantly, getting your personas and a model aligned so that everyone actually feels responsible for FinOps. So thanks for that. So a couple of things. We're going to open it up for questions, but because we're recording the breakout so that we share with folks that weren't able to make it, I'm going to make sure I pass around this orange box. If you can ask your question into the box. Now, I'll tell you a secret, this box doesn't always work. So if it's not working for you, I'll bring this mic over. All right? So who has some questions? Let's open it up for questions. All right, put your hand up, and I will gently toss this to you. Yes? Okay. All right.
So we talked about cloud services cost, which is fantastic, and I really appreciated the shared cost allocation methodology. How do you deal, any application includes your cloud services, plus it could include a lot of your other licensing, other costs, right? SaaS cost. Do you guys do that allocation as well? And what about the shared service, shared cost for those?
Yes, we actually do. So we are doing a SaaS, our license-based subscriptions, anything to do with Azure, all of that. We run them through the exact same framework, and we run through the same costs. Because whether it's a SaaS or a subscription license, like we said, for BMO as a bank, our materiality is a lot higher. But we say if it's not worth the materiality, then what do we do? But if it is worth the materiality, then how? Right? And again, we run it through, again, if this is a license subscription where we want everyone to start adopting, then maybe how we do our chargeback model is different versus one where it's good to have, it's part of the best practices, but you as a line of business or business unit, you decide the behavior for it and you take the costs. So it depends. So we still run, whether it's SaaS or license-based subscriptions, the exact same way.
For example, let's say Datadog, like it's a shared APM cost that many applications will be using that service. Sometimes
Correct.
Security.
Correct.
How do you amortize, like how do you distribute those costs out?
Yeah. So we've actually had, go for
Yeah.
it.
So at BMO, our construct is more of a project funding item kind of approach. And at an individual application level, if the particular security service is being applied and tagged to the specific application, all the costs as it relates to usage by resource or any of the non-cloud costs, the support team, the labor costs associated with setting up the application, as well as any software or even on-prem costs, will all get amalgamated at a project level. And it is at the project level that we determine what the cost allocation to the respective line of business is. Gotcha. What we have talked about so far is really the step before, aligning at the asset level that whether is this particular asset that we're looking at even worth putting through the allocation model before we get this amalgamated into the project mode and reallocated out to the line of businesses.
Got it. Thank you.
Any other questions? Toss it around.
Associated with them.
Right, so tagging resources, right? So we have rigorous tagging governance and reporting that's there. There's no other easy way around it. So any untagged resources that are there, we have like weekly reports that get run, and then the chase down around it is different. Obviously, we try to automate quite a bit of our tagging. Again, clearly, if something can be broken, it does break. So even if it's like template-based deployments, we've seen things go wrong. I think the trickiest thing that we are currently in the mix of trying to solve is when people mistag, especially when resources move between applications and so forth. they used an old template, they used, their own human errors and stuff like that. But again, constantly, as much as possible, automate it, as much as possible, CDKs, as much as possible, a lot of governance reporting and so forth. And what we then do is we actually have a reporting to say, overall, here's our untagged cost spend. And we keep that as part of our management reporting month over month. And so that goes up to our execs as well. And to our governance committees. So it is a very big deal. If you have a certain threshold that's untagged, it will get red, yellow flagged. So
I think we have time for maybe 2-3 more questions. Anyone else have a question? Over. You got a question? All right. Here you go.
I want to go back to the question earlier about allocating like Datadog. So for a platform like Cloudability, where it's used to manage your clouds, do you allocate and share those costs across your business units as a part of your consumption?
Yeah, so one of the things we'll do is, one is something mandatory usage versus is it optional usage? I think that's a big deal that changes how we do it, right? So whether it's Datadog or even more security-based stuff, if it's mandatory usage, then our allocation model is different because it's mandated, everyone has to use it, and how we allocate it out is its own. So I don't know, do I still have the checklist? Yeah, I do. Let me just go back to that little diagram, right? So like we said, this checklist is an example. We actually have a little bit more that we have here. Again, we couldn't share the entire checklist for confidentiality reasons, but again, one of our checks is mandatory usage, security stuff, and then our cost allocation model does change based on that. So whether it's, again, your API-based usages and so forth, the question is, it always comes back to value. What is the value we're trying to achieve from here? And if it's mandatory for it, then our cost model does change to the business units. Yeah.
Questions?
I think they have one over there.
So
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about, you touched on change management towards the end, and was that a multi-year journey with your CFO to get people to shift towards having to be allocated at this level versus, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. And it's still a continuous journey for us in terms of moving our finance counterpart along. And I think the challenge we have, speaking as a finance person, is accounting rules doesn't shift as fast as technology. So many a times, myself, having the benefit of having both technology and finance background, helped me to be the broker between the two teams to have that kind of conversation, right? Because within finance, it takes time for them to change their business process, alignment with IFRS, Canadian GAAP, etc. All those are things that are holding them back. But being a central Cloud FinOps team, coming up with creative but within the bounds of accounting rules and shifting them towards the right direction to have a more equitable chargeback is one of our primary mission. And similar to the shift left construct, as we kind of speak about with all our technology partners, with our finance counterpart as well, the whole idea of shifting left, having finance being more involved in the business and technology, is also one of the key change that needs to take place in order for us to evolve the allocation model at a faster speed.
All right, thank you. I think we're at time. Just another round of applause for Natasha and Swapna.
Thanks for watching. Check out more FinOps X 2024 content on our YouTube channel on the 2024 playlist. Support our channel by liking, subscribing, clicking the notification bell, and by leaving comments and questions for our speakers. We appreciate your support.